relationships can spawn so many other areas of cooperation. Mr. Speaker, am I out of time? It seems I am. Thank you.
The Honourable Member for Lac St. Louis will have 3.5 minutes left for the questions and comments period when the House resumes consideration of this debate. Statements by members. The Honourable Member for Terrebonne. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Today, I am very proud to be a Quebecer. Obviously, that happens to me a lot. Because in Quebec, we are always able to stand up for ourselves when our most valuable interests are being challenged. Once again, Quebec stood up to the ambitions of the powerful Bay Street people. The Bloc Québécois sounded the alarm with its member for Joliette concerning Bill C-29, and we're very proud of that. Someone had to hear this message. The National Assembly of Quebec is the one that heard it. The consumer protection groups as well. The Quebec Chamber of Notaries, legal experts, the media, and all of the opposition parties, both in Quebec City and Ottawa, heard this message and conveyed it. This is a message from Quebecers to the Quebec nation, and it was heard. Mr. Speaker, that is a wonderful common front that we very rarely see in this House. Solidarity is the foundation of our society, and it's not a coincidence that through the generations, Quebec...
The Honourable Member for Scarborough Centre.
Mr. Speaker, I would like to recognize Hellenic Home for the Aged, an organization providing exceptional care and services to seniors in Scarborough Centre and across Toronto. We are blessed with a large Greek community, and the volunteers and staff at Hellenic Home offer a unique cultural setting that recognizes the customs and traditions of Greece while providing for the needs of individuals from all communities. In addition to seniors housing and long-term care, Hellenic Home also offers a day program to benefit elderly adults living with disabilities or cognitive impairment. I recently had the pleasure of attending Hellenic Home's 18th annual gala with great entertainment from famed Greek recording artist Yannis Kataves. The 550 guests raised over $190,000 to support long-term care and improve the quality of life for local seniors. Please join me in congratulating Hellenic Home for the Aged for their service to our seniors. Thank you.
Member for Wellington Halton Hills.
Mr. Speaker, 75 years ago today, Canada was fighting our first battle of the Second World War, the Battle of Hong Kong. Hong Kong is often forgotten because it began on the same day as Pearl Harbor. Mr. Speaker, Hong Kong is Canada's Pearl Harbor, and we cannot forget. During that 17-day battle, 1,975 Canadian soldiers of the Royal Rifles of Canada and Winnipeg Grenadiers desperately defended Hong Kongers, including my father and his family, from a vicious attack. 290 were killed, 500 were wounded. Those not killed were taken prisoner of war. 264 of them died in prisoner of war camps under horrific conditions. Of the nearly 2,000 Canadians who went to Hong Kong, over 1,000 were killed or wounded, one of the highest casualty rates of the Second World War. Mr. Speaker, these Canadians died so that my father and his family could live. Mr. Speaker, we will never, ever forget.
The Honourable Member for Scarborough Agincourt.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I am pleased today to rise to recognize an important milestone in my riding of Scarborough Agincourt. Agincourt Mall recently celebrated its 50th anniversary. This mall, which was built in 1966, holds a rich history. You may be wondering how my namesake Scarborough Agincourt, or the Agincourt Mall, got its name. It started from a local merchant, John Mill, who wanted to bring a local post office into the area. And through the assistance of a Quebec MP, he did so, but on the condition that he actually name it based on a French name. And he decided to bring the name Agincourt after the Battle of Agincourt, when King Henry V prevailed in 1415. Over the years, this mall has changed a great deal, but it remains an important cornerstone of my riding, a place that I have frequented many times since I was a small child. I want to personally congratulate Agincourt Mall on its 50th anniversary and its service to its community as an important community hub, and I invite my colleagues to join me in the celebration of this important milestone. Thank you.
Bravo!
The honourable member for Nanaimo Ladysmith.
At Christmas time, Nanaimo Ladysmith celebrates groups serving on some very tough frontline social issues, like John Howard Society, which helps prison inmates stop reoffending and falling back into addiction. After its staff Christmas party, Nanaimo business Hold Fast Metalworks gifted John Howard $5,000, saying, quote, "Our business has been impacted by the fantastic work John Howard provides. We have 2 gentlemen employed at our shop that have been through your Guthrie House program. They're exemplary employees, motivated, caring, and compassionate people with well-honed skills in conflict resolution and clear communication. It's because of your programs they are looked upon as role models in our shop and have changed many of our other employees' attitudes on how they judge people who've had a less than typical past. Thank you, John Howard and Hold Fast Metals, for this vital work, for celebrating this work. Merry Christmas."
Bravo.
Honourable member for Brampton Centre.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Today I rise to speak about a special project in my heart of my riding. Being a member of HoC committee, we are already working on National Poverty Reduction Strategy. The committee has discussed and researched the study in great detail and will be traveling shortly from coast to coast to coast. On behalf of our government, I am proud to have opportunity to announce investment of almost $16 million into affordable housing program. I had the pleasure of visiting the project, which included state-of-the-art accessible affordable housing facility and indoor playground. There is no reason for poverty. I shall not rest until the enemy is destroyed. I appeal to everyone today, let's join hands and take on our enemy. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Honourable member for Calgary Shepherd.
Mr. Speaker, this weekend the world again saw darkness as 3 separate terrorist attacks rocked the Middle East and Turkey, leaving at least 117 dead and 226 wounded. In Cairo, parents and children were indiscriminately murdered while they worship, in a brutal violation of the peace and safety that the church represents. In Istanbul, 38 people were killed outside of a sports stadium by an extremist faction. And in Aden, soldiers who sacrificed to defend their families and their country were killed in a suicide bombing. Among those who were fortunate and survived these attacks, hundreds of them will face a lifetime of pain and hardship from their injuries. We condemn these attacks as cowardly and despicable crimes. We stand with all nations who oppose this senseless taking of life. We expect that the anti-terror efforts of our NATO ally Turkey will not serve as an excuse for the continued persecution of minorities and abuse of human rights, but instead that the Turkish government will respect the rule of law as it seeks to bring those responsible to justice.
For Eglinton Lawrence.
Mr. Speaker, last week the Honourable Minister of Immigration announced the Prioritizing Family Reunification Program, which will reduce processing times so that Canadians and permanent residents can reunite with their loved ones faster than ever before. The Minister has been working hard to combat these waiting times for applications. In 2016, processing times were reduced by 15% for in-Canada applications. The program will have a big impact for families right across the country, including for the people in my riding. Thanks to these changes, more families will be reunited in my riding by this time next year than would have otherwise.
We plan to welcome 64,000 spouses and dependent children by the end of 2017, which is higher than the average over the past 10 years.
My 2 girls are here today, and this is why I would like to congratulate the Minister for this initiative that is working to reunite families and bring homes back together.
The honourable member for Hamilton West, Ancaster Dundas.
Mr. Speaker, November 19th marked International Survivors of Suicide Loss Day, when people gathered to comfort one another and grapple with the aftermath of suicide by sharing stories of healing and support. When I was a chaplain, I walked with youth haunted by dark emotions of emptiness, helplessness, anger, guilt, and sometimes the light of hopeful healing. That's why it's important to support the organizations who work to prevent suicide, like Hamilton's own Mina, Minds in Need of Attention. Prevention is important, Mr. Speaker, but not enough. There is a quiet multitude of people who selflessly support those living with mental illness. Offering this support comes at a great cost to them, mental, physical, social, and often economic. Mr. Speaker, we must find ways to support both those at risk for suicide and the people who give up so much to care for and help them.
The honourable member for Elgin, Middlesex, London.
Mr. Speaker, Christmas is a time for giving and a time for families to join together to celebrate the birth of Christ.
At the Vecchio home, we will be very busy while our children are heading home to our house in St. Thomas.
Bravo! Prepared by Pops and Nana as Nana scurries around for hors d'oeuvres. Les familles seront.
The families will attend the First United Church in great number for the candlelight service at 10 o'clock.
Vandal's last Christmas service. On Christmas Day, the Martin family will be busy with everyone looking for space to lay their heads for our traditional Christmas Day nap following our turkey dinner. I
know how lucky I am, but we need to think of those who are less fortunate than we are.
Canoe. Let's work together to give everyone a Merry Christmas. Please support one of our Salvation Army kettle drives or help serve dinner at one of the missions. Make Christmas great for everyone. From my family to yours, we wish you a very Merry Christmas and a healthy, prosperous New Year. Thank you.
The Honourable Member for Vimy. Mr. Speaker, the holiday season gives us the opportunity to get together with our family and friends and to think about how lucky we are to live in Canada, where we experience peace and freedom on a daily basis. So many people the world over have no place to live, nothing to eat, and live in fear and danger every day. That is why it is important to underscore the remarkable efforts made by exceptional institutions and people who work so hard to make our world better by fighting poverty, illness, violence, and discrimination. In my riding of Vimy, such people are numerous. I would like to name them all, but I don't have time, so I will commend the Relais Communautaire de Laval for all the work it has done over the past 30 years to help Canadian families who are in crisis. Thank you for everything you do, and Merry Christmas.
Mr. Speaker, as Christmas Day draws near, the men and women at North American Aerospace Defense Command, located at 22 Wing CFB North Bay, are preparing for the most important mission of the year. On December 24th, NORAD personnel who keep watch over Canadian airspace will join their counterparts in Colorado Springs to track Santa Claus as he travels around the globe. At
In North Bay, NORAD will be tracking Santa Claus and scrambling fighter jets to accompany his sleigh once he arrives in Canadian airspace.
I encourage all Canadians, young and old, to visit noradsanta.org to track Santa's progress on Christmas Eve. On behalf of all the honourable members, I'd like to salute the personnel at 22 Wing CFB North Bay for their service to this country and for bringing a little bit of magic to us all. Merry Christmas to you, Mr. Speaker, to all honourable members, and to all Canadians. Joyeux Noël.
Merry Christmas.
The honourable member for Kamloops, Thompson, Caribou.
Mr. Speaker, I would like to honour 10 recipients from my riding who received the Governor General's Award in 2016. 5 decorations for bravery were presented to Mike Hyde, Wilbur Kent, Robert Reed, Thomas Blair, and leading Air Cadet Shannon Young. Rescuing people from drowning, burning vehicles, or armed intruders, these individuals all showed great courage and a willingness to risk their own lives to save another. The Sovereign's Medal for Volunteers was awarded to Dennis Robertson, while the Caring Canadian Awards were presented to Laurie Fry and Linda and Paul Blanchette. These individuals were recognized as exceptional volunteers who made significant and sustained contribution to their respective causes. Finally, the Meritorious Service Award was dedicated to Gordon Gore. Kamloops will always be thankful to Gordon for sharing with us his love of science, passion for education, and his dedication to the Big Little Science Centre. To these 10 recipients, your actions inspire our nation and command our deepest gratitude.
Hear, hear.
The Honourable Member for Vaudreuil-Soulanges.
Today I rise in the House to acknowledge the important work of several community organizations and their volunteers who are providing help to families in need this holiday season.
Community organizations in my region allow these families and these men and women to take advantage of the magic of Christmas. I'm thinking of the wonderful work done by Mr. Jean-Philippe Giroux, who is the General Director of Operation Nez Rouge in Vaudreuil-Soulanges, Carol Laws of Pont Bridging, Francine Plamondon of L'Actuel, Lynn Kershaw of Meals on Wheels, the various Christmas fundraisers, and all the dedicated volunteers who give their time to these organizations. Once again, Mr. Speaker, I would like to congratulate them for their generosity and dedication. They are why Vaudreuil-Soulanges is such a great place to live. Happy holidays. The Honourable Member for Abitibi-Témiscamingue. Mr. Speaker, before we leave for the Christmas holiday, I wanted to take the time to invite you and your entire family and all the population to a super fine evening. In fact, you are invited to a party in La Salle and ring in the New Year at the Nicole Otto Arena for a traditional French-Canadian evening. So saddle up your horse and carriage, dress in your Sunday best, because the whole town will be there. 100 years is something else. So pull up a log to the fireplace and lend an ear, because our fiddlers and harmonica players will be playing tunes for the New Year. And there will be some special guests with even better music. And how about little Beaulieu, our good old boy, who's going to spin us a fine yarn. As midnight approaches, you'll be served some liquor that'll knock your wool socks off. But don't get too pickled, because the preacher man will be watching. And if ever you have to miss this great party, then don't fret. The festivities of this 100-year anniversary are going to continue till the summertime.
A member for Sherwood Park, Fort Saskatchewan.
Mr. Speaker, today marks the 80th birthday of His Highness the Aga Khan, the spiritual leader of 15 million Ismaili Muslims. In leading his community, the Aga Khan has emphasized pluralism and tolerance, reason and dialogue, and the importance of humanitarian work. He has a strong connection to Canada, having been named an honorary Canadian citizen in the last Parliament, and also having played hockey in his younger years. His Development Foundation has partnered with Canada, in particular with our Office of Religious Freedom. When he addressed our Parliament 2.5 years ago, he encouraged MPs to appreciate the connection between faith, politics, and humanitarian work. He said, "The role of the Ismaili Imam is a spiritual one. His authority is that of religious interpretation. It is not a political role. At the same time, the spiritual and material worlds are inextricably connected. Faith is not removed from daily practical matters in family life, in business, in community affairs. Faith, rather, is a force that should deepen our concern for our worldly habit, for embracing its challenges, and for improving the quality of human life." Happy birthday.
The Honourable Member for Hastings, Lennox and Addington.
Mr. Speaker, I'm happy to rise in the House today to spread a little bit of holiday cheer. Over the weeks, I've had the pleasure of marching in not one, not two, but 11 Santa Claus parades, and that's not even all of them. From Maynooth near the edge of Algonquin Park to Amherst View on the shores of the St. Lawrence to the heartland of Highway 7 in Marmora, Madoc, Tweed, and up to Northbrook and Addington Highlands, my wife and I have joined in with many volunteers to join in the celebrations and met with families throughout our riding. I know that most urban MPs have the opportunity to march in maybe one or two parades, and that's okay. But I can assure you, Mr. Speaker, that there is no better place to be than in rural Canada at this time of year. Mr. Speaker, from my family to yours, and to all Canadians, we wish you a very Merry Christmas and all the best in 2017.
Bravo! Bravo.
Questions orales, oral questions. The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
Mr. Speaker, yesterday was a disappointing day for Canadians. They saw their Prime Minister bragging about being the targeting of the target of illegal lobbying activities during Liberal Party fundraisers. They watched him admit to activities that are undignified of his office. They saw his message. Rules don't apply to him. Does the Prime Minister understand that he is not above the law? And will he finally put an end to these privileged access fundraising activities? The Right Honourable Prime Minister. Mr. Speaker, Canadians know that wherever I am and whoever I'm speaking to, I talk about our challenge of creating economic growth for the middle class. I talk about the fact that we increase taxes for the 1% of the wealthiest Canadians so that we could lower them for the middle class. I talked about the fact that we stopped giving Canada Child benefits to the richest families so that we could give more to the families who really need it. We talk about our priority of creating growth for the middle class, and that's what animates us every day. The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
Mr. Speaker, that he's changed his talking points about following the rules after what he said yesterday. Mr. Speaker, let me remind the Prime Minister, on the day that he was sworn in, he said that he was committed to the highest ethical standards. And now that has become a joke. So my question to the Prime Minister is simple. What happened? When did money become more important than the integrity of his office?
Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, Canadians know that I say the same thing in any given context. I'm always talking about our priority for creating growth for the middle class, our priority of raising taxes on the wealthiest 1% so we could lower them for the middle class, that we're ending sending child benefit checks to wealthy families so we can give more to the families who actually need it. Canadians know that we are focused on creating growth for the middle class, and we always follow the rules.
Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
Mr. Speaker, what happened yesterday wasn't just disappointing for Canadians, it was embarrassing for the Prime Minister. He actually admitted to reporters to be illegally lobbied at fundraisers for the Liberal Party of Canada, and Canadians actually had to watch him admit to behaviour that brings disrepute to his office. They saw also the message that he was sending, that the rules don't apply to him. Does the Prime Minister understand that he is not above the law, especially he is not above the law, and that he should end these cash for access fundraisers?
Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, wherever I go across the country, I hear from Canadians who are pleased that we are raising taxes on the wealthiest 1% so we can lower them on the middle class. They are pleased to hear that we have stopped sending child benefit checks to the wealthiest families so we can do more for the families who need it. That approach is going to lift 40% of kids living in poverty out of poverty, raise hundreds of thousands of kids out of poverty. That is our priority. That is what we talk about wherever we go.
Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
Mr. Speaker, no one actually believes him on this issue anymore. And let's talk about priorities, because how a Prime Minister spends his or her time says a lot about the person. By attending countless cash for access fundraising events for the Liberal Party, he's showing his true priorities to Canadians, and he's setting a low standard for the people around him. Canadians now think the Prime Minister can be bought, and he's already done enough damage to his office. So when is he going to stop this cash for access fundraising? Today?
Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, Canadians well know that we raised taxes on the wealthiest 1% so we could lower them for the middle class, which, quite frankly, the Conservative Party voted against to protect their friends. The fact is, raising taxes on the wealthiest 1% so we can lower them for the middle class, ending child benefit checks to wealthy families so we can give more to the families who need it. These are the things that this government is focused on doing. This is what we will continue to make as our priority.
Honourable Leader of the Opposition, order.
Mr. Speaker, speaking of following the rules, Canada's political finance rules are clear. Foreign powers can't donate or buy access. But foreign donors from China have now been exposed using the Trudeau Foundation as a back-channel way to make donations and gain influence with this Prime Minister. Everybody knows they're not writing these checks out of the goodness of their hearts, because they've only started doing it since he became the Prime Minister to buy access to him. Mr. Speaker, will the Prime Minister do the right thing and instruct the Trudeau Foundation to stop this practice immediately?
Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, the Trudeau Foundation is an independent foundation established in the memory of my father, with which I ceased to have any engagement shortly after having become leader of the Liberal Party. They are an excellent foundation that does good work.
Order. I know that members are aware of an event coming in a week or two, and they want to be on their best behavior. So let's allow the Honourable Prime Minister to finish his answer.
Thank you. As an independent foundation with which I have no involvement, the Trudeau Foundation does good work to advance the cause of the social sciences and humanities in a nonpartisan way.
Honourable Member for Outremont.
Let me read what the Liberals have said about Cash for Access fundraising. Quote, at events like this, government business is not discussed. His minister. Another, quote, any individual who wishes to initiate a policy discussion is immediately redirected to instead make an appointment, the Liberal Party. And finally, from himself, quote, I listen broadly and I make the right decisions based on what's best for Canada. One of these quotes is not like the others. Can the Prime Minister tell us who's telling the truth?
Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, as Canadians well know, this government listens to all Canadians in different contexts. But the fact is, one of the things we do is we say the same things regardless of the context we're in. We point out that we raise taxes on the wealthiest 1% so we could lower them for the middle class. We point out that we've stopped sending Canada Child benefits to wealthy families so that we can do more for the families who need it, which will reduce child poverty by 40% and lift hundreds of thousands of kids out of poverty. Those are our priorities, and we talk about them in every given context.
The Honourable Member for Outremont.
Me has become just trust me, and on this, Canadians just don't. Je suis.
I'm sure that the Prime Minister didn't intend to write a work of fiction when he wrote these new so-called ethics rules for the government. These rules were supposed to be concrete rules, and the Liberal government should be following these rules. We want to help them do that, Mr. Speaker. So we want to know, will the Prime Minister support the NDP's bill aiming to give real teeth to these rules, to make them the force of law? The Right Honourable Prime Minister. Mr. Speaker, no matter where I am or who I'm talking to, I always talk about the same thing. The fact that our priority is to create economic growth for the middle class by increasing taxes for the 1% of the wealthiest Canadians so that we're able to reduce them for the middle class. I talk about giving the Canada Child benefit to the families who really need it by not giving it to the wealthiest families. Those were our priorities. And that's what we've been working on for the last year, and that's what we talk about whenever we talk to anyone.
With saying that he listens but isn't influenced, is that it reminds people of someone who said that he smoked pot and didn't inhale. Nobody believes it. But, you know, speaking of that, to get elected, this Prime Minister loved to say that the war on drugs isn't working. But today's Liberal cannabis report says nothing about decriminalizing possession. So before he can say that his #1 priority is to protect young Canadians, can the Prime Minister tell us how handing out criminal convictions and criminal records to young Canadians is somehow supposed to protect them?
Hear, hear.
Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, we've been very clear since the very beginning that our plan to control and regulate the sale of cannabis has two goals. One, to keep it out of the hands of our kids. Right now, kids have easy access to cannabis across this country. We need to change that. Secondly, to remove the source of significant revenue to criminal organizations and street gangs who benefit from the illicit trade of cannabis. Those are our priorities. That is what we are focused on. And until we change the laws stand.
The Honourable Member for Outremont.
Mr. Speaker, during the last election, the Prime Minister promised that if elected, he would help protect the workers and pensioners of insolvent U.S. Steel. Yet here we are in the midst of an historic purchase agreement of U.S. Steel where pension and benefit cuts are on the line, and the Prime Minister's been missing in action. What does the Prime Minister intend to do for a retired Stelco worker who spent 40 years at a blast furnace and stands to lose his health benefits?
Right Honourable Prime Minister.
We understand how difficult the situation is for many workers across this country, and indeed the workers at the Stelco plant. That's why we're focused on working with them to try and develop solutions. We are engaged and we are aware of this challenge, and it's one that we are working with them on.
De Lac-Saint-Jean.
The Honourable Member for Lac-Saint-Jean. Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, this Prime Minister finally admitted yesterday, after weeks of questioning, that in these fundraising activities, he talked about government business. Every time the Prime Minister accepts $1,500 in a donation for his party, he is staining the function of Prime Minister. They said that they wouldn't be even giving the impression that people would be able to buy information about government business. So will the Prime Minister finally put an end to this practice? The Honourable Government House Leader. Mr. Speaker, as we've always said, we are listening to Canadians and engaging with Canadians from coast to coast about subjects that they care about. When we make decisions, we are guided by a very important principle, the best interests of middle-class Canadians. This is the approach that we adopted by reducing taxes for the middle class. It's the approach that we adopted when we introduced the Canada Child Benefit. And it's the approach we adopted when we increased the benefits for the CPP. We will continue to work for Canadians. Thank you. The Honourable Member for Lac-Saint-Jean. Mr. Speaker, I think the only full-time job they created since they came to government was the person who's creating all of their new texts, because they've completely changed their answers since yesterday, Mr. Speaker. When you're in government, you always have to treat people with dignity. But yesterday when I found out that they were talking about government business, well, I mean, it's fine to talk to people, but when you're talking about people paying $1,500 to do so, there's an ethical problem there. This needs to end, Mr. Speaker. They need to stop talking about government business during partisan affairs. The Honourable Government House Leader. Mr. Speaker, as the member knows well, fundraising rules are among the strictest in this country. The rules say that only Canadians can make donations to Canadian parties, and we will continue to follow those rules. And that means there won't be any conflict of interest. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Member for Red Deer Lacombe.
So, Mr. Speaker, we now know that there's no one over at the Privy Council office enforcing the rules set out in the Prime Minister's open and accountable government document. We also know that a vast majority of Canadians oppose these unethical and shady cash for access events the Prime Minister and his cabinet are hosting. We even know members of his own caucus are afraid to identify themselves when they speak about their disapproval of these very same events. So when will the Prime Minister stop digging in the hole that he's created for himself and end these unethical cash for access events?
Hear, hear. The Honourable Government House Leader.
Mr. Speaker, what the member clearly doesn't understand is that this government is committed to working with Canadians. This government is committed to engaging and listening to Canadians. When this government makes decisions, there's only one thing that we consider. What is in the best interest of middle-class Canadians? Those are the people we will continue to work for. Those are the people that we work very hard for, and I encourage all members of this place, let's work harder together. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Member for Red Deer Lacombe.
So, Mr. Speaker, it's actually insulting and frankly embarrassing that the House Leader has to answer these questions with the same old tired talking points. She's forced to do the dirty work for her leader, who, for most of the time can't even be bothered to show up and answer these questions himself in this House. So the Liberal caucus knows...
Order. I know the member doesn't want to bring disorder into the House, and he knows that members cannot draw attention to the presence or absence at any time of another member. So I'd ask him to come to his question.
I think if you'll check the record, Mr. Speaker, you'll find I did no such thing. But the Liberal caucus knows he's cast...
The Honourable Opposition House Leader.
Mr. Speaker, after months of denials, the Prime Minister finally admitted what everyone knows to be true, that he discusses government business at his Liberal Cash for Access fundraisers. So now that he's admitted to breaking the rules, will his ministers do the same? Will the Justice Minister tell us what government business she discussed with lawyers at the fundraiser last April, or maybe the Finance Minister can tell us what fiscal policy he discussed with bankers at the Liberal Cash for Access event in August? Can they please all get their stories straight, and can they please admit they all broke the rules?
The Honourable Government House Leader.
Mr. Speaker, what every member of this government will tell you is that yes, we are engaging with Canadians, yes, we are listening to Canadians, and everywhere we go, we will tell Canadians that we are working hard for middle-class Canadians and those working hard to join it. That's why we lower taxes on middle-class Canadians. That's why we increase taxes on the 1% of wealthiest Canadians. That's why we are supporting and helping families with children that need it the most, and we will continue to do the good work that we are doing. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Honourable Opposition House Leader.
Well, Mr. Speaker, the Minister of Fisheries said, and I quote, "Our colleagues know very well that at events like this, government business is not discussed." Well, Mr. Speaker, we all know now that that is completely false. So was the Fisheries Minister told by the Prime Minister to mislead Canadians? How long will Liberal ministers go along with the Prime Minister's corrupt and deceptive behaviour?
The Honourable Government House Leader.
Mr. Speaker, Canadians know very well that this government is working very hard for middle-class Canadians and those working hard to join it. We will continue to engage and listen to Canadians. That's why we are consulting with them. That's the work we will continue to do when we are making decisions, because we know that we need to respond to the very real challenges that Canadians are facing. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Member for Trois-Rivières. Mr. Speaker, according to the Minister of Pipelines, the evaluation of the Energy East project can now resume because 3 new NEB board members have been appointed. Except the former board members had to recuse themselves, undermining the integrity of the process. The Prime Minister had promised that there would be a new NEB process. He approved Kinder Morgan with Stephen Harper's botched process, and he's maintaining that approach with Energy East. Quebecers deserve better than 40 Liberal MPs who have forgotten Quebec's motto, Je me souviens, I remember. Why aren't these Quebec MPs calling on the PM to respect his commitments?
Government House Leader.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'll respond by saying that there is no minister by that name in this House. The Honourable Member for Rosemont-la-Petite-Patrie. Mr. Speaker, the fall session is drawing to a close, and that's the only piece of good news for the Liberal government, because things are not going well for them. They're already mired in scandal, and they've been absent on many questions that are important for Quebecers. Can you hear that noise? Listen closely. That's the sound of 40 Liberal members from Quebec. Bombardier, nothing. Forestry, nothing. Small businesses, nothing. Cheese producers, practically nothing. Public transport, we're still waiting. What are these 40 Liberal MPs good for? Where are they hiding? The Honourable Minister of Transport. Mr. Speaker, I thank my colleague for his moderation. I'd like to say very clearly that the 40 Liberal members for Quebec, including the Prime Minister, 6 ministers, and 33 other MPs, are there to promote Quebec's interests. That's what we've been doing from the very beginning, and that's what we will do until the very end. Thank you. Honourable Member for Louis Saint Laurent. Mr. Speaker, yesterday the Prime Minister made an admission, and perhaps he can admit other things. For example, he has a lot of imagination when it comes to taxing Canadian workers. He created new CPP contributions. He created a new Liberal tax on carbon. He created a new tax on health insurance and a new Liberal tax on dental health insurance. He has so many wonderful ways of taxing Canadians. Is the Prime Minister ready to invent a tax on broken promises? The Honourable Minister of Finance. Mr. Speaker, it was our government that cut taxes for the middle class. In fact, this was the first thing that we did. We also introduced the Canada Child Benefit, which is helping 9 families out of 10. They now have more money in their pockets. The other parties who dealt with this issue were against these tax cuts and against the Canada Child Benefit. We are certain that we are going to continue helping the middle class with our measures.
York Simcoe.
Today is one of those days when Liberals are trying to think up new ways to tax Canadians. By that, I mean a day ending in the letter Y. That has Canadians asking why the Liberal innovation agenda is now being led by a new tax on hard-pressed middle-class Canadians for their internet use. Last week, it was a carbon tax on everything. This after tax hikes on textbooks, children's sports, music lessons, income taxes, and more. Why do the Liberals now want to tax Canadians more just to use the internet? Why is their Christmas gift to Canadians just sacks full of tax?
The Honourable Minister of Economic Development.
Mr. Speaker, we believe that the internet is a key part of our innovation agenda, an innovation agenda that will focus on Canadian middle-class families, that will focus on the rural and urban digital divide, that will focus on creating jobs and opportunities, Mr. Speaker, from coast to coast to coast. We recognize that innovation is a key engine of our growth, and we're going to remain focused on investing in people, new technologies and companies, Mr. Speaker, because that is what is good for the Canadian economy.
Honourable Member for Carleton.
Post-media revealed this week that the government is considering a new tax on health and dental plans that could hit 13.5 million hardworking Canadians. Such a tax might cause employers to drop the plans altogether, making it impossible for middle-class families to see a dentist or a psychologist. Only the super rich, those who can afford Liberal fundraisers, would have that luxury. Mr. Speaker, is this government so broke that it needs to tax Canadians out of their health plans?
Honourable Minister of Finance.
Mr. Speaker, we'd like to be very clear in this House. We first introduced a reduction in taxes on middle-class Canadians. That's an important first measure. Then we moved forward to help 9 out of 10 families with children with, on average, $2,300 more money without paying taxes on that. Mr. Speaker, we are ensuring that our tax system is efficient, that it's fair, and that Canadians can understand it. We will move forward with fair measures that will ensure that middle-class Canadians do better in future than they're doing today.
Honourable Member for Carleton.
By middle-class tax cut, he means they gave $800 in tax relief to someone earning $150,000 a year, like a Liberal MP, and zero to someone earning $45,000 a year. Now that same person has to pay Liberal carbon taxes, Liberal payroll taxes. Those carbon taxes will raise the price of the very goods on which the lowest income people need to spend a disproportionately large amount of their income. Why is this government so determined to hurt most those with the least?
Honourable Minister of Finance.
In fact, Mr. Speaker, we put in measures that will help Canadians along all sectors of the income stream. For that family with $45,000 that the honourable member is mentioning, if they have children, that family is significantly better off. They are better off in the time when they are raising their children, being able to pay for the things that they need in their family life on a day-to-day basis. Mr. Speaker, we will continue to focus on how we can help middle-class Canadians, on how we can help families to raise their children. That is the mission that we're on in this government.
The Honourable Member for Jonquière. Mr. Speaker, once again, the Liberals are missing in action when it comes to Quebec. We have no softwood lumber agreement nor any Plan B. It is our workers who are going to pay the price with plant closures, loss of jobs, and a more fragile regional economy. The Quebec government took the bull by the horns, as announced loan guarantees. Now, our federal government should take its responsibilities seriously once and for all. Quebec already has a Plan B. What is the minister waiting for? A month of Sundays?
The
Honourable Minister of Natural Resources. Mr. Speaker, we're prepared for any eventuality, and we will continue to work for the forestry sector in this country. The Minister of International Trade and I have had a meeting that was very productive with our Quebec counterparts just last week, and we will continue to cooperate with them and all our provincial colleagues and territorial colleagues as well.
Nokaski.
Mr. Speaker, today on the Hill, we are joined by laid-off port workers who came all the way from Churchill to fight for our port. The closure of the port is devastating for Churchill and for our north. But what's the Liberal record? They privatized it and are doing nothing to reopen it. Mr. Speaker, this is about standing up for our country. Hear, hear. So when will the Prime Minister stand up to the American billionaire who's holding Churchill and our North for ransom? When will he stand up for Churchill, for our North, and for Canada?
Hear, hear. The Honourable Minister of Economic Development.
Mr. Speaker, this is a very important file. That is why I'm working with my colleagues from Manitoba, and I visited Churchill. I had an opportunity to meet with the Northern delegation, an opportunity to have a town hall session where I met members from the community to hear their concerns and put forward a plan going forward. That plan includes $4.6 million for regional economic development. We're focusing on tourism, Arctic research. We're looking at ways to diversify the economy, create jobs and opportunities, because Churchill is important for the North and it's important for Canada, Mr. Speaker, and our government is committed to that region.
The Honourable Member for Avignon-La-Métis, Matane-Matapétia. Mr. Speaker, consumers in my riding and Quebecers and Canadians want to be well protected. Yesterday, the Minister of Finance announced that he would ask the Commissioner of the Financial Consumer Agency of Canada to mobilize stakeholders and counterparts in the provinces and territories in order to examine and assess best practices for consumer protection. Could the Minister explain to the House the reasons why this decision was made? The Honourable Minister. Mr. Speaker, protecting the interests of consumers was a key element of our plan to support the middle class and to ensure the growth of the economy. Having said that, we heard the concerns of Quebecers about the level of protection they enjoy. That's why I asked the Senate government leader to withdraw Clause 5 of C-29 so that we could reintroduce it following consultations in order to maintain the federal framework for the protection of consumers of products and financial services.
Mr. Speaker, there is no decision that bears more gravity than putting Canadian troops in harm's way. It is a Canadian tradition that such a decision is debated and voted on in this House. It's not only Canadian tradition, it is what every parliamentary democracy does. The Dutch government tabled a 14-page report in their parliament detailing the duration and size of its Valley mission, its goals, risks, costs, and the rules of engagement. So will the Liberals submit their proposed UN mission to Parliament for a full debate and a vote before committing our troops to the African mission?
The Honourable Minister of Foreign Affairs.
There is a lot of things that my colleague said that are completely true. It's a very serious decision. The government is considering it very seriously. We work with our allies to see in which way Canada will fulfill its responsibility for peace in the world, and in which way we are also considering in which way we will engage Parliament about it.
The Honourable Member for Charlebourg-Haute-Saint-Charles. Mr. Speaker, the Minister of Foreign Affairs' vapid answer proves that we need a debate and a vote before we deploy our soldiers in the quagmire in Mali to protect pigs that doesn't exist. Before any deployment, the Netherlands make sure they have national consensus about the mission. Without a consensus, there is no mission. In the Netherlands, the government is open and transparent about missions of this nature. A letter explaining the minute details of the mission are shared with Parliament, and there's a debate. Will the Liberals commit to as much transparency? The Honourable Minister of Foreign Affairs. Mr. Speaker, when we deploy our efforts for peace, it's because peace has not been acquired. Peace is endangered, and it has to be helped along with courage and firmness, as Canada always does. We've done this throughout our history. We play our role for peace.
Interlake Eastman.
Mr. Speaker, the Liberals always just say, just trust me. But Canadians aren't buying it. Canadians deserve to know where our troops are being sent. What drugs will they be prescribed while they're there? What is the exit strategy? And how is this mission in Canada's national interest? Before sending their troops to Mali, the Dutch government outlined this important information to their parliament. This is exactly the type of information the Liberals demanded when they were in opposition. So when will the minister do the right thing and be honest with Canadians about this mission?
Honourable Minister of Foreign Affairs.
Certainly, the practice of this government to be always open to Canadians and frank with Canadians. For such a matter of this importance, my colleague may be sure that we will communicate to Canadians in the proper way proper way. And to this House, we'll communicate in a very open mind and with a lot of transparency, because this will be a very serious decision that we need to take to honor Canada's histories for the fight for peace everywhere in the world.
Honourable Member for Charlebourg St. John. Mr. Speaker, the government could be inspired by the Dutch example before sending our soldiers in the UN's most dangerous theatre of operations. Over 106 Blue Berets have lost their lives in Mali. Before any deployment, the Standing Committee of the Senate on National Security has asked that the government establish the size of the mission, its objectives, the risks, the costs, the rules of engagement. Will the Liberals follow the Senate's wise recommendations? The Honourable Minister of Foreign Affairs. Mr. Speaker, it's with great interest that we followed what the Senate had to say about this important mission and what the opposition has to say. My colleague knows that I cannot announce in advance what the government will announce in due course. We will describe the role that Canada must play for peace in the world.
Mr. Speaker, I wonder if the Prime Minister really knows what is going on with U.S. Steel from his answer he gave earlier. During the campaign, Liberals promised U.S. Steel employees and retirees that employers must honor commitments and, quote, pensioners must be included in any consultation and planning process. Today, the Hamilton Steelworkers are forced to come to Ottawa to once again ask this government to come to the table. The impending sale of U.S. Steel gives no guarantees that pensions, health benefits, and wages will be protected. Hamiltonians are asking, what is wrong with this government? Why, with the Hamilton Steelworkers in the room, why is the government refusing to help the 20,000 plus who stand to be hurt by this deal?
Honourable Minister of Economic Development.
Mr. Speaker, I'd like to thank the member for his question. As he knows, our government recognizes Canadian steel producers to be world-class, and that is why we're engaged on this file. And it's very important to our manufacturing sector and our innovation agenda going forward. The member knows the proceedings are still before the courts, but I hope for a fair and successful resolution. And we are committed to the region, and we're committed to the sector. We're very much engaged, Mr. Speaker, and I'm working very closely from the member from Hamilton East Stony Creek, the member from Hamilton West Ancaster Dundas, and the member from Burlington. We'll continue to work on this file, work with the steel workers, work with the company to find a good solution.
Order. The Honourable Member for Hamilton Centre will come to order. The Honourable Member for Essex.
Again, no answers from Liberals for working Canadians. When will this government start standing up for Canadian steel jobs? Mr. Speaker, China is unfairly dumping steel at prices that undercut and hurt Canadian producers. Our steel industry is urging the government to strengthen Canada's trade remedy rules. Instead, the Liberals are considering giving China market economy status, which would make it even harder for our steel producers to compete. Why are the Liberals letting China off the hook? And when will this government get serious about tackling unfair steel dumping?
Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of International Trade.
Mr. Speaker, steel dumping is a major concern for Canada. The Minister is working with her colleagues, the Ministers of Finance and Innovation, to support Canadian jobs and competitiveness. The Minister met with the CEOs of Canada's steel companies through the Canadian Steel Producers Association in early June to discuss their concerns. She's met with workers. She's also worked on the issue while in Europe this month. And as chair of the Canada-U.S. Committee in Cabinet, Mr. Speaker, the Minister is working with our American counterparts to address the issue of overcapacity.
Honourable Member for Oshawa.
Mr. Speaker, some of the Marijuana Task Force recommendations directly contradict the Prime Minister's claims about keeping pot out of the hands of young people. The task force recommended a legal age of 18 to buy marijuana. This goes against the Canadian Medical Association's recommended age limit of 21 and the scientific evidence that marijuana use can have serious effects on the brain up to the age of 25. Mr. Speaker, are the Liberals going to make a political decision or an evidence-based decision?
Honourable Minister of Health.
Mr. Speaker, we were
very pleased this morning that the Cannabis Task Force has presented its report. We look forward to reviewing its recommendations in full detail. We know that this task force was well led by the Honourable Anne McClellan, that the experts on the task force heard from Canadians across the country, including those who understand the evidence around all of the questions that were put to this group, and we look forward to introducing legislation in the spring which will legalize, regulate and restrict access to cannabis.
Honourable Member for Richmond-Tabasca. Mr. Speaker, we found out this morning that the table on the legalization of cannabis recommends authorizing growing marijuana at home for personal use. Can the minister explain how we can prevent children from having access to this marijuana when the public is authorized to grow it at home? Who will manage this? The cities, police, provincial or federal government? Mr. Speaker, the report is tabled. Red lights are flashing. Is there anyone across the floor who can give us straight answers on this topic?
Minister of Justice.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I'm pleased to stand up in this House to acknowledge the receipt of the task force report, the substantive amount of work that they did. Also to acknowledge my parliamentary secretary, the member from Scarborough Southwest, for his work. We look forward to reviewing the report in a comprehensive manner with my minister's colleagues from Public Safety and Health to ensure that we introduce legislation in the spring of 2017 to legalize, strictly regulate, and restrict access to marijuana.
The honourable member for Lethbridge.
Mr. Speaker, our democracy is founded on the principle that people's voices matter. They get to have a say. The need to consult and gain social license is something that the Liberals constantly boast about. However, yesterday the Health Minister announced that the Liberals are gutting the community consultation requirements when it comes to heroin injection sites. Mr. Speaker, families deserve to have a voice. Schools deserve to have a voice. Small businesses deserve to have a voice. Mr. Speaker, why have the Liberals silenced the voice of local communities when it comes to implementing safe injection sites?
Honourable Minister of Health.
Mr. Speaker, the member opposite is well aware that Canada is facing a serious public health crisis in the number of hundreds of Canadians who have had accidental overdose deaths this year. We were pleased yesterday to introduce the new Canadian Drugs and Substances Strategy, which will save the lives of Canadians. It will take a harm reduction approach to the serious public health problem, and we will recognize the wisdom of the Supreme Court, who gave us guidance as to the factors that have to be taken into consideration, including making sure that communities are appropriately consulted on these matters.
Good. Honourable member for Vancouver Centre.
Mr. Speaker, Canada is facing a public health crisis of tragic proportion. In BC alone, there were 700 deaths this year from fentanyl-laced opioids, 1,100 across the country. In BC and Alberta, thousands are treated near death in emergency rooms. Most affected are IV drug users, youth, and those who use recreational drugs, and first responders who are at risk from these high-potency fentanyl. Can the Minister of Health tell us what she's doing now to save lives and what tools and resources she will employ to prevent more deaths?
Honourable Minister of Health.
Mr. Speaker, I want to thank the member from Vancouver Centre for her question and for her outstanding advocacy on this very issue. We have introduced an approach to drug policy in this country which is comprehensive, collaborative, compassionate, and evidence-based. We recently held an opioid summit and conference at which we had 42 organizations who made commitments as to what they are going to do to address this very crisis. And yesterday I was very pleased to introduce the Canadian Drugs and Substances Strategy, which will put control of that strategy into the hands of the Minister of Health where it belongs. We will take a harm reduction add harm reduction as a pillar into our response, and we will make sure that Canadians...
The honourable member for Calgary-Nose Hill.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It's been nearly 2 months since this House passed a motion to bring Yazidi women and girls to Canada. Today, the European Parliament honoured Nadia Murad and for her work in this particular issue. After countless hours of committee study and further follow-up, this government has still not produced a number in terms of how many of these women they're willing to bring to Canada. NGOs, departments are waiting on this information. So I have a very simple question that I hope the minister will answer prior to Christmas break. I hope he'll do it right now. How many Yazidi women and girls is the government going to bring to Canada?
The Honourable Minister of Immigration.
We have been working very actively on a two-part strategy.
We will bring Yazidi people, women and girls from Turkey and from Lebanon, and also we have sent groups of officials into Iraq to consider, and we will bring them from that country as well. The members should understand that this is an extremely dangerous part of the world, so we cannot release the details of our plan, but we are committed to do it and to do it on time.
The honourable member for Edmonton Strathcona.
Mr. Speaker, Indigenous communities in Northern Alberta are calling for action on toxic contamination of the traditional foods. Repeated studies have revealed that rising levels of toxins emitted by oil sands operations are contaminating the Athabasca River and Wood Buffalo National Park. Despite the mandatory duty of the federal health minister to act on evidence that toxins may impact health, all the Conservative government did was initiate a tax on a brave doctor who revealed his concerns. Will this health minister finally act?
Hear, hear.
Honourable Minister of Environment.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I'd like to thank the member opposite for her advocacy on this issue. We are working together, the health minister and I, in addressing concerns in relation to toxins. We take this file very seriously and will continue to act.
The honourable member for Ottawa South.
Mr. Speaker, this morning I was very pleased to participate in an announcement at the University of Ottawa where our government committed over $51 million to support the creation of a new state-of-the-art science and technology complex. This will be a multidisciplinary innovation hub that will support the entrepreneurship activities of students and researchers. Mr. Speaker, can the Minister please update this House on how investments such as this at the University of Ottawa are supporting economic growth, spurring innovation, and creating jobs?
The Honourable Minister of Economic Development.
Mr. Speaker, I'd like to thank the member from Ottawa South for the question and for his hard work in the region and for promoting innovation. As he knows, the University of Ottawa investment is part of the overall $2 billion allocation we have for strategic investments for our universities and colleges. And when leveraged with provinces and territories and the institutions, that's $4.8 billion. And this is about innovation, Mr. Speaker. And innovation is about better jobs, better opportunities, better living standards, a better future for our children and grandchildren. As our Prime Minister says, better is always possible.
The member for Edmonton-Wetaskiwin.
Mr. Speaker, in our balanced budget of 2015, Prime Minister Harper and Finance Minister Joe Oliver established an expert working group tasked with the creation of a Canadian Autism Partnership to support those living with autism, their families and caregivers. The current leader of the opposition, then Health Minister, officially launched the working group that summer. This world-leading team of Canadians has completed its work and reported back to the Liberal Health Minister with a business plan and a request for support. My question for the Minister: can Canadians living with autism and their families count on her support for this important initiative?
Minister of Health.
Speaker, I thank the member opposite for his question and for his very important work on this matter. He certainly knows that autism spectrum disorder has a significant and lifelong impact on individuals and their families. And we have made significant investments in this area. For instance, through the Canadian Institutes for Health Research, the government has invested more than $27 million on direct research related to autism in the last 5 years. We are committed to working with all partners to help Canadians with disabilities to participate in our society, and including work with the Canadian Autism Spectrum Disorders Alliance. They bring perspective of those living with autism and their families. I have received the proposal that the member has indicated to establish a Canadian Autism Partnership.
The Honourable Member for Rivière-du-Nord. Mr. Speaker, the Bloc Québécois tabled in this House a bill to clean up political party financing. Public financing would be restored and the ceiling for contribution lowered. From an ethics standpoint, this is an issue of confidence and democracy. Democracy loses out when there's an appearance of cronyism with the elites, and loses again when the public gets the impression that major donors control their government. The population would like to know whether this government will vote in favour of our bill, yes or no. The Honourable Government, the House Leader. As the member knows full well, the rules for political party financing at the federal level are the strictest in the country. We will continue to follow them. The Chief Electoral Officer has also stated that Canadian law in this matter is the most strict and transparent in the world. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Honourable Member for Montcalm. Mr. Speaker, throughout the session, the government offered a smorgasbord of opportunities to be criticized over its $1,500 cocktails with privileged access to the Prime Minister. In the report of the Electoral Reform Committee, Jean-Pierre Kinsley proposed the restoration of public financing of political parties based on votes received. The Bloc Québécois has tabled a bill that would make sectoral financing and undue influence by major donors obsolete. What will the government do? Repeat this cassette about the rules being the strictest in the world, or restore that form of funding? The Honourable Government House Leader, it's not a cassette, Mr. Speaker. What I'm sharing with all members and Canadians is true. We will continue to consult Canadians in order to meet their real challenges. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I think the honourable member for Mirabel has a point of order.
Mr. Speaker, point of order, please. Yesterday, the Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Finance asked me to read the provisions of Bill C-29. He could perhaps get information before asking question, because what was clear in the Marcotte ruling is that the federal government allowed us to clarify the provisions concerning consumer protection. Mr. Speaker, I read the Marcotte ruling, and it is the banks that the court is calling upon to respect Quebec legislation. I'd like to thank the honourable member for Mirabel for having presented his point of order, but it's actually debate.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm seeking unanimous consent for a very urgent motion. I think all members of this House know that the opioid crisis is a national health emergency that is taking the lives of Canadians on a daily basis. Although it's taken a year, the government has tabled a bill that moves us in the right direction by, amongst other things, repealing the previous government's C2. The NDP believes that the critical need